Time at rest, exploring the past, slowly. Imagine standing near a river's edge, 40,000 years ago, in what is now north of the Ebro River in Spain. Mist hangs low in the air. You live among your people, shaped by shared stories, language and traditions that stretch back further than memory. Across the river, to the south, lives another people. Their bodies are broader and stronger, adapted to cold and long hunts. They have their own traditions, their own ways of teaching children, their own lives lived by firelight in caves. They are Neanderthals. For between 1,500 and 3,000 years, this has been the shape of the world. Two kinds of humans living on either side of the same river, not in conflict, not in isolation, simply aware of one another. Sometimes you see smoke on the far bank, sometimes distant figures move through the trees, and sometimes the river is crossed. Over generations, people meet, knowledge is shared, families blend. Children are born carrying both lineages. Even now, traces of those lives remain within us. There is no moment when everything changes. Only time, climate, and a quiet thinning of presence. This is a story about that slow fading. Before continuing, viewers are invited to support the creation of long-form historical documentaries like this one by subscribing, liking, and commenting. Let us know where in the world you are tuning in from and what time it is for you as this journey begins. These small gestures help keep these stories alive and enable more of our time, research, and care to be devoted to future film projects. With that, let's step back together through deep time, tracing the long and often subtle forces that have shaped humanity and the world it inhabits. 60,000 years ago was a land shaped by rhythm and change. Forests, rivers, and mountains spread across the continent, forming natural boundaries, corridors, and homes. Valleys held streams that wound slowly through the trees, and open plains stretched toward distant hills. Rivers, like the Ebro in what is now Spain, defined territories, offered resources, and shaped the movement of life. It was a world both abundant and exacting, where survival required keen observation, patience, and skill. Neanderthals were already well established in these landscapes. They had adapted to the cold of glacial Europe, to the cycles of seasons, and to the availability of food. Their bodies, compact and muscular, allowed them to endure harsh climates, travel long distances, and effectively hunt large game. They were skilled observers of the land. They understood patterns of animal movement, seasonal plant growth, and the subtleties of weather. Knowledge was embedded in every gesture, every tool, every path. Life was a dialogue with the environment, where attentiveness was essential. Homo sapiens had begun migrating into Europe from Africa. They brought with them new ways of thinking, new tools, and distinct social practices. While physically different, slighter, more mobile, they were equally observant and attuned to their surroundings. Both species shaped the land around them, learned from it, and were shaped in turn. Yet, even as they lived in overlapping territories, much of the interaction between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens was quiet and observational. Along the Ebro River, the two species existed in parallel worlds. On the northern banks, Homo sapiens moved with cautious curiosity, exploring forests, observing wildlife, and learning how to navigate the challenges of a new land. On the southern banks, Neanderthals maintained their camps in caves and rock shelters, tending fires, crafting tools, and raising children in patterns refined over tens of thousands of years. The river was a presence both physical and symbolic, a boundary that marked territory, a conduit for glimpses of life across its flow, a subtle connector in a shared ecosystem. Life for both species was governed by attentiveness, Every day involved decisions, informed by observation: where to hunt, when to gather, how to shelter from the wind and rain. Neanderthals sharpened flint, shaped spears, and prepared game. They maintained fires with care, arranging stones to contain heat and light. Shelters were reinforced, and spaces organized for efficiency and safety. Homo sapiens, too, observed and experimented. They tracked animals, noticed seasonal changes, and refined tools and strategies over time. In these patterns, the two species followed parallel rhythms, each learning from the land and, occasionally, from the other. Encounters between species were infrequent but meaningful. A distant figure glimpsed through mist, the flicker of firelight across the river, footprints pressed into soft soil. These were the signs of neighbors, of parallel lives, quietly coexisting. Observation allowed learning without confrontation. Over time, these small insights, techniques for preparing food, refining a tool, or understanding animal behavior, could travel across species lines, carried subtly from one group to another. There was curiosity, sometimes cautious imitation, sometimes shared knowledge, but little competition that disrupted coexistence. Neanderthals, in particular, had intricate social lives. Within their groups, they shared knowledge, cared for one another, and taught survival skills through careful repetition. Children watched, learned, and participated in daily activities. Elders guided, corrected, and transmitted wisdom. Daily life was structured by shared tasks: preparing food, tracking game, maintaining shelters, and observing the world. Skills were learned slowly and attentively, ensuring that each generation could thrive in a challenging environment. Homo sapiens, while physically and culturally different, displayed similar attentiveness. They explored, observed, and innovated, developing new hunting strategies, refining tools, and adjusting to the unfamiliar landscape. In some instances, they may have observed the methods of Neanderthals and adopted what worked. Knowledge was never static. It flowed between species in subtle, nearly invisible ways. Tools, gestures, and practices traveled across the river, through time, and between groups, shaping behaviors and outcomes quietly but profoundly. The environment itself was a constant teacher. Rivers swelled in the spring, forests thickened, plains froze in winter. Animals migrated, plants ripened and faded. Each shift required careful observation and adaptation. Success depended on attention to detail: the subtle sign of footprints in mud, the sound of distant wings, the hint of wind direction. Both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens had to be vigilant, flexible, and patient. Life was a series of interactions with the land, as much about understanding the world as surviving within it. In this shared space, culture moved gently. Songs, gestures, and tools held meaning. Fire was central to both species' lives, a source of warmth, a gathering point, and a symbol of community. Children learned not only the practical skills of hunting and gathering, but also the subtleties of social life: how to cooperate, communicate, and navigate relationships within the group. Across generations, these skills became refined, passed quietly, and observed closely. Culture, in this sense, was both survival and continuity. Even the smallest traces mattered. A carefully shaped stone, a fire pit maintained with care, footprints pressed into soft soil. These were the markers of presence, the evidence of lives lived attentively. They were gestures of persistence, showing that each group, whether north or south of the river, engaged with the world thoughtfully, deliberately, and with awareness of both the environment and each other. For thousands of years, this coexistence persisted. The river defined a rhythm of life without creating conflict. Each species adapted to its territory, observed the other from a distance, and occasionally crossed the boundaries of familiarity. Knowledge traveled subtly, and lineages sometimes intertwined. Life was both separate and connected, a delicate balance of observation, adaptation, and continuity. In this quiet, shared world, the Neanderthals and Homo sapiens lived, hunted, and persisted. The river witnessed the patterns of their lives, the cycles of seasons, and the gradual flow of generations. It was a world of patience and attentiveness, where survival and understanding went hand in hand. The presence of two human species, aware of one another yet respecting boundaries, created a subtle richness that shaped the unfolding story of humanity. Neanderthals were a remarkable branch of the human family. Their bodies were solid and muscular, built for endurance, cold, and the physical demands of life in Ice Age Europe. Broad shoulders, thick limbs, and powerful torsos gave them strength for hunting, carrying, and survival in landscapes both harsh and beautiful. Yet their appearance was only a part of the story. Their intelligence, ingenuity, and social complexity were equally profound, woven into the quiet rhythm of daily life. Life for a Neanderthal group was a careful orchestration of observation, skill, and cooperation. Tracking game, recognizing the subtle signs of predators, foraging for edible plants, and maintaining shelter demanded constant attention. Their lives were deeply intertwined with the environment, responding to its shifts and rhythms with measured precision. Mountains, rivers, forests, and plains were not merely spaces to occupy. They were teachers, offering cues and guidance to those who observed closely. Toolmaking was central to Neanderthal life. Flint, bone, and antler were shaped into implements for hunting, preparing food, and daily survival. Spear points were carefully flaked to maximize efficiency, scrapers refined to clean hides, and stone knives maintained to endure repeated use. Each tool was more than a piece of technology. It was a product of thought, observation, and planning. Children learned these skills by watching elders, imitating gestures, and practicing repeatedly until proficiency became second nature. There was an artistry to these implements, a combination of practicality and subtle understanding of material properties. Neanderthals were attentive to each other. Communities cared for the injured and the elderly, as evidenced by skeletal remains showing survival long after debilitating injuries. Individuals with broken limbs or chronic illness lived because others assisted them, providing food, warmth, and protection. This was not an occasional act of kindness, it was a consistent aspect of social life. Care extended to infants, who were guided patiently through the steps of learning, and to adolescents, who began taking on responsibilities within the group. Knowledge was transmitted not only through demonstration but also through shared experience, embedded in observation and practice. Symbolic behavior, while subtle, also reveals a rich cultural life. Burials, sometimes with carefully placed stones or objects, suggest awareness of mortality and intentionality. Marks on bones, pigments on rocks, and arrangements of objects within caves hint at meaning, ritual, and reflection. These gestures were deliberate, indicating a consciousness of life, death, and perhaps even an understanding of continuity beyond individual existence. It is a reminder that Neanderthals were capable of abstract thought, and that their experience of the world extended beyond immediate survival. Daily life was structured, attentive, and complex. Children learned by doing, watching, and mimicking. They were not passive recipients of instruction but active participants, gradually absorbing knowledge through experience. Skills were layered, learning to recognize plant patterns, track animals, make tools, and navigate landscapes required repetition and attention. Social roles were observed, tested, and gradually adopted. Through these patterns, knowledge became encoded in behavior, ensuring that generations maintained both survival skills and cultural practices. Neanderthals' relationship with fire was central to life. Fires provided warmth in cold climates, protection against predators, and a space for communal gathering. They were maintained carefully, fed consistently, and sometimes relocated to optimize smoke, heat, or light. Fire was not merely functional, it was social. Communities gathered around it, sharing knowledge, rest, and quiet companionship. It created cohesion and offered opportunities for learning that extended beyond the practical into the cultural. providing a subtle framework for teaching, storytelling, and observing the environment. Hunting strategies were sophisticated and collaborative. Large game required coordination, patience, and detailed understanding of terrain and animal behavior. Groups observed migration patterns, tracked footprints, and anticipated seasonal movements. Strategies were flexible, adapted to circumstances, and passed down across generations. Hunting was as much a test of knowledge and observation as it was of strength, and success depended on both individual skill and collective effort. Yet Neanderthals were not isolated from other humans. Across rivers, hills, and valleys, Homo sapiens were present. While early interactions were cautious, they allowed for observation and occasional cultural exchange. Techniques, gestures, and knowledge occasionally crossed species lines, sometimes influencing tool-making, foraging, or hunting. These exchanges were subtle and often indirect, but over generations, they contributed to a shared pool of human knowledge. Despite their robustness and skill, Neanderthals were vulnerable to environmental change. Shifts in climate, forest composition, and animal populations required constant adaptation. Their survival depended not only on physical capability, but on attentiveness, learning, and the ability to adjust strategies across generations. Their endurance through Ice Age Europe demonstrates their remarkable resilience and adaptability. Neanderthals were human in the fullest sense, curious, observant, social, and capable of reflection. They shaped their environment, maintained communities, and created culture. Their lives were deeply interwoven with the land and with each other, structured by the seasons, the terrain, and the rhythms of daily survival. They were capable of thought, care, and innovation, and they left traces of these capacities in stone, bone, and pigment. To imagine them is to see not a distant, primitive species, but humans with depth, insight, and complexity. They were cousins, relatives whose lives ran parallel to ours for millennia. Their story, though concluding tens of thousands of years ago, continues through the traces they left in landscapes, in culture, and within the DNA of modern humans. Neanderthals were, in many ways, ordinary humans living extraordinary lives in extraordinary times. They were teachers, hunters, artists, and caregivers. Their presence was felt in every tool, in every track across the landscape, and in every gesture preserved by the rhythm of generations. They were human, fully, deeply, and enduringly human. The climate turns. The Ice Age was not a single frozen moment. It was a vast, shifting rhythm of cold and warm, of abundance and scarcity, unfolding over centuries. Europe's landscapes were never static. Forests advanced and retreated, opening wide plains and then closing them again with dense growth. Rivers carved valleys with patient persistence, swelling and shrinking with seasonal melt and rainfall. Glaciers moved slowly, shaping mountains and valleys. Wind carried snow, rain, and dust, painting the land with imperceptible strokes of change. To those who lived within this world, time was measured not in years alone, but in subtle shifts of temperature, vegetation, and animal behavior. For Neanderthals and Homo sapiens alike, survival demanded careful attention. Every season presented new challenges and opportunities. In winter, the cold penetrated bone and sinew, food became scarce, and rivers shifted or froze. In spring, melting ice swelled rivers and softened the ground. Summer brought sudden storms and fluctuating prey populations. Fall signaled the migration of animals, the ripening of fruits, and the preparation for harsh months ahead. Life required constant observation, planning, and adaptation. Small groups moved with the land. Neanderthals returned to familiar caves or shelters, timing their journeys to avoid dangerous conditions. Paths that had been reliable could suddenly become treacherous. Familiar hunting grounds might fail to yield sustenance. Knowledge passed down through generations guided every decision, shaping patterns of movement and behavior. The rhythm of life was intertwined with the rhythm of the world. A single harsh winter could teach lessons carried forward for decades. Elders spoke of seasons past, teaching which valleys were safe, which slopes could hide predators, and which rivers would flood unexpectedly. Homo sapiens, arriving from the north, faced similar pressures. Their strategies sometimes differed. They coordinated larger groups, exchanged knowledge over distances, and developed social networks that allowed learning to travel beyond immediate families. Yet they too had to understand the land intimately, reading subtle signs in footprints, tracks, wind, and sky. Their knowledge of ice, snow, and animal behavior guided decisions in a world that could change unpredictably within a single season. Throughout this shifting landscape, the Ebro River remained a steady presence. It could isolate or connect, depending on season and circumstance. In spring, it surged with meltwater, its currents treacherous and swift. In winter, temporary ice might allow passage, offering rare opportunities for movement and contact. The river became part of the environmental rhythm, shaping where people traveled, hunted, and settled. As climate cycles persisted, their effects accumulated. Neanderthal populations began to contract. Habitable territory shrank, forcing groups into more isolated pockets. Food scarcity grew more common, and the careful knowledge that had once sufficed now required greater precision. Survival became an increasingly delicate balance. Each generation inherited the lessons of the last, yet could do little to alter the relentless progression of climate. Even in the face of these challenges, life continued with attention and care. Children learned to read the signs of weather, to anticipate storms, to recognize subtle tracks left by animals and other humans. Hunters observed the terrain for shelter, strategy, and prey movement. Elders taught the younger generation not through commands alone, but through demonstration and repetition. Fire remained central, providing warmth, protection, and a gathering place for sharing knowledge. Stories were woven into daily tasks, reinforcing memory, skills, and culture. Life was sustained through meticulous attention, slow observation, and patient adaptation. Through these centuries, subtle exchanges occurred between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. Observing one another's methods, tools, and behavior, individuals occasionally adopted new approaches. A more efficient hunting technique, a method of maintaining fire, or the shape of a tool could transfer quietly, without ceremony, without rivalry. Cultural influence moved across the landscape like mist over a valley, gradual, invisible, persistent. Generations grew up within these changing landscapes, learning not only survival, but rhythm. They observed the patterns of prey, the timing of seasonal plants, the rise and fall of rivers, and the signs of approaching storms. Their lives were embedded in a continuum, shaped by a balance of memory, learning, and careful observation. Knowledge accumulated slowly, preserving not only survival strategies, but the sensibilities and ways of understanding that defined their humanity. Climate was never sudden, yet it was relentless. Glacial cycles, cold snaps, and warming trends sculpted the land and human activity alike. The environment imposed limits, yet also offered lessons and opportunities. Adaptation was constant, not dramatic, a quiet necessity that shaped behavior, culture, and survival in ways often imperceptible to those living within it. The river, the forests, the hills, the wind, each carried stories and lessons. The landscape itself became a teacher. The Neanderthals and Homo sapiens who lived in this world responded with attentiveness, patience, and continuity. Their strategies, their ways of life, and their understanding of the environment were inseparable from the land itself. In the sweep of time, the Ice Age's influence was profound. It guided where groups settled, how they hunted, and how they interacted. It shaped isolation and connection alike, subtly altering the patterns of life across generations. The slow pressure of climate change did not announce itself dramatically. It flowed through centuries, reshaping opportunities and constraints with quiet insistence. And through it all, life endured, Communities persisted, children grew, fires burned, tools were shaped, and the river continued its eternal course. The Ice Age moved as it always had, slow, inevitable, and enduring, shaping the story of two human species as they observed, learned, adapted, and continued, quietly, through the rhythms of time. The lives of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens overlapped like parallel streams, sometimes converging, sometimes flowing quietly alongside one another. These encounters were neither dramatic nor violent. There were no battles, no sweeping confrontations. Instead, interactions were subtle, tentative, and shaped by observation, respect, and circumstance. Life unfolded in a landscape where one could see but not always touch, where one could learn without speaking, and where proximity did not necessitate conflict. Across the river, Homo sapiens established settlements that reflected their unique ways of living. They moved lightly across the landscape, their groups smaller, their strategies different. Their toolkits differed in design, their hunting approaches varied, and their social structures were organized around flexibility and observation. Yet, in this diversity, there existed a shared understanding of survival, of the rhythms of nature, and of the subtle cues the land provided. Neanderthals observed these neighbors from a distance, noticing behaviors, strategies, and adaptations. They may have seen the coordinated movements of Homo sapiens while hunting, the careful preparation of shelters, or the ingenious use of tools that seemed slightly different from their own. These observations did not spark fear or hostility. They sparked curiosity, reflection, and sometimes subtle imitation. Similarly, Homo sapiens observed Neanderthals' strength, endurance, and knowledge of the land. Each species offered a quiet mirror to the other, demonstrating alternative approaches to the same challenges. Encounters, when they occurred, were brief and deliberate. A group might notice smoke rising from a distant cave, signaling habitation. Footprints along the riverbank, or trails through the forest provided clues of movement. Occasionally, figures would be glimpsed through the mist, walking with purpose, carrying tools or game. These signs were sufficient to communicate presence and intent, requiring no words. Knowledge was exchanged silently, through observation, through the careful reading of gestures, and through the subtle interpretation of patterns in the landscape. Interbreeding, though rare and not often direct, became a quiet form of connection. Children born of mixed lineage carried both physical traits and the inheritance of knowledge. Through these blended families, cultures intertwined gently. Skills, habits, and even ideas could transfer across species boundaries without force or coercion. Over generations, the riverbanks became places of subtle interaction, occasions for learning, adaptation, and mutual awareness. Hunting practices exemplified this quiet exchange. Both species pursued game with skill and patience, yet their approaches differed. Neanderthals relied on strength, ambush, and close-range tactics. Homo sapiens utilized coordination, observation, and movement across open terrain. Where territories overlapped, observations were made, techniques adapted, and strategies refined. These adaptations were not dramatic. They were incremental, subtle, almost imperceptible. Over time, the knowledge accumulated, creating a shared pool of insights into the land, the animals, and the demands of survival. Tool-making offered another form of exchange. Neanderthals' stone points, scrapers, and blades reflected millennia of refinement and adaptation to local resources. Homo sapiens experimented with new forms, often lighter, sometimes more precise, sometimes versatile across multiple tasks. Each species could observe the other, borrowing techniques that were effective and integrating them into their own repertoire. These exchanges were small, unspoken, yet significant, influencing the trajectory of cultural development across generations. Social behaviors, too, were observed. Group organization, child-rearing practices, and communal routines offered insights across the river. Neanderthals noted how Homo sapiens shared tasks, coordinated movement, and structured daily life. Homo sapiens, in turn, observed Neanderthals' communal care, resilience, and endurance. These lessons were absorbed subtly, incorporated into daily routines, and reinforced through practice. There was no need for conflict. Learning could occur silently, through attentive observation and reflection. Even the landscape itself served as a medium for interaction. Trails, hunting grounds, river crossings, and shelter locations all conveyed information. Footprints, discarded tools, and signs of habitation were subtle signals, allowing one species to learn from the presence and behavior of the other without direct confrontation. Knowledge moved across space and time, shaping adaptation and survival, creating a layered understanding of the shared environment. Over centuries, these quiet interactions accumulated into profound consequences. Genetic mixing introduced Neanderthal DNA into Homo sapiens populations, leaving traces in modern humans outside sub-Saharan Africa. Cultural practices, hunting techniques, and tool innovations traveled across species boundaries, gradually influencing the evolution of both groups. These exchanges were neither sudden nor forceful. They were the product of careful observation, subtle imitation, and slow adaptation. Encounters along the Ego River were marked by patience and attentiveness. Both species lived with an awareness of the other, sometimes interacting, sometimes maintaining distance. Life was defined by observation, learning, and adaptation, shaped by the land and the rhythms of generations. The river acted as both a boundary and a bridge, guiding movement, influencing behavior, and mediating relationships. Even as Neanderthals' territories gradually contracted, these encounters continued to leave traces. Tools, symbols, and DNA persisted, carrying evidence of subtle coexistence. Every observed behavior, every adapted technique, and every blended lineage contributed to the ongoing story of human evolution. Knowledge moved quietly, unhurried, and profoundly, shaping generations in ways that would persist long after direct encounters had ended. In the end, these interactions were neither extraordinary nor dramatic. They were ordinary, gradual, and deeply human. They remind us that survival is rarely determined by dominance or conflict, but by observation, learning, and adaptation. Through patient coexistence along rivers, forests, and valleys, Neanderthals and Homo sapiens shared not only space, but insight, culture, and lineage. This quiet mingling created ripples that endure within us, invisible yet profoundly present, in our DNA, our knowledge, and our understanding of what it means to be human. For the Neanderthals of southern Iberia, centuries passed with quiet inevitability, shaping lives in ways both subtle and profound. Their worlds slowly contracted, not because of conflict or catastrophe, but through a gradual convergence of pressures, climate shifts, diminishing resources, and the relentless, patient movement of Homo sapiens into Europe. Each year layered experience upon experience, leaving traces in the landscape, in tools, in patterns of survival. Communities became smaller and more isolated. Bands that once roamed expansive territories were constrained by geography and scarcity. Valleys, forests, and hills became markers of both opportunity and limitation. Travel required more planning, hunting more precision, and survival more attentiveness. Each decision carried weight: where to set a camp, which game to pursue, how to conserve resources through winter. These choices, repeated across generations, shaped the fate of entire groups, creating patterns of life that persisted quietly over time. Neanderthal culture remained rich, but fragile. Knowledge of tool-making, fire maintenance, and shelter construction was preserved, yet with fewer practitioners. Ceremonies, symbolic gestures, and subtle ritualized behaviors continued, often in the privacy of caves or rock shelters. Tools were refined with care, fires tended meticulously, and spaces organized thoughtfully, reflecting a deep connection to the environment and each other. Yet each passing generation held fewer individuals to carry forward these practices, and the web of cultural continuity began to thin. Hunting strategies became increasingly specialized. Groups had to adapt to changing prey populations and seasonal uncertainty. Coordination, patience, and keen observation were essential. Animals moved differently as climate and terrain shifted, rivers altered courses, forests thinned or thickened, and game sought new paths. Neanderthals tracked these subtle changes, adjusting their strategies with foresight and experience. Even in scarcity, ingenuity persisted. Snares were tested, ambush points observed, and knowledge passed on through demonstration rather than instruction. Survival demanded attentiveness, flexibility, and endurance. Yet environmental pressure was not the only force at work. Interaction with Homo sapiens, once occasional and subtle, became rarer as territories contracted. The river that had for millennia allowed glimpses of the other species now acted more decisively as a boundary. Neanderthal groups retreated to areas where they could sustain life with less interference, while Homo sapiens expanded gradually, bringing new ways of living and subtle pressures that shaped the Neanderthals' decisions. The overlapping world that had persisted for centuries slowly became a parallel world of isolation. In this context, Gorham's Cave in Gibraltar emerged as one of the last strongholds of Neanderthal life. Situated on a rocky coastline overlooking the sea, it provided shelter, warmth, and perspective. Within its walls, generations tended fires, prepared tools, and carried out daily life with meticulous care. Archaeological evidence suggests they maintained organization, spaces for work and rest, and perhaps even symbolic gestures within the cave. Gorham's Cave represents the endurance of a culture at the edge of extinction, a place where the long story of Neanderthal life reached its final chapters. Life in these final strongholds was defined by careful observation and subtle adaptation. Social structures, though strained by small numbers, persisted. Children learned through example and repetition. Adults maintained daily routines that ensured survival. Fires were kept burning, shelters reinforced, tools crafted with precision. Even as numbers dwindled, the depth of knowledge and attention to the environment remained, a testament to millennia of adaptation and experience. Isolation, however, exacted a toll. Small populations faced the challenge of maintaining genetic diversity, cultural knowledge, and social cohesion. Mistakes carried more weight, and unforeseen events could have larger consequences. Yet even in this constrained existence, Neanderthals displayed resilience and continuity. They adapted to their shrinking world with ingenuity and care, drawing upon lessons accumulated over countless generations. Gradually, however, the signs of presence became faint. Campsites were smaller, hearths fewer, and tools more sparing. Trails that had once carried the movement of many now reflected the steps of few. In the open spaces, the echoes of Neanderthal life faded, leaving traces in the rocks, the soil, and the carefully maintained caves. Yet even in this quiet thinning, knowledge, ingenuity, and adaptability endured in subtle ways. The story of this fading is not one of abrupt loss, but of patient attrition. The Neanderthals' disappearance was measured by decades and centuries, not by a single event. There was no dramatic finale, no moment of sudden disappearance. Instead, life persisted in small groups, gradually diminishing, until the last individuals and places like Gorham's Cave carried forward the final threads of a once widespread presence. Even in decline, the Neanderthals' influence endured. Interactions with Homo sapiens over centuries left traces in culture, technology, and genetics. Children born of blended lineages carried forward elements of both species, ensuring that even as direct Neanderthal presence waned, their impact remained embedded within the broader human story. The riverbanks, forests, and caves bore silent witness to their lives, preserving the subtle patterns of observation, adaptation, and endurance that defined their existence. The fading of the Neanderthals is a reminder that extinction is rarely sudden or violent. It is often a slow process, shaped by time, environment, and circumstance. It is a quiet thinning, marked by continuity as much as absence. Life carries on, and in that continuation, the traces of those who came before persist, within the land, within culture, and within the people who followed. Gorham's Cave stands as a final testament, a place where the echoes of Neanderthal life remain preserved. Within its walls, fires once burned, tools were shaped, and daily life continued, even as the world outside shifted inexorably. Their story did not end with drama, but with the quiet persistence of knowledge, adaptation, and the careful attention to life that had defined them for tens of thousands of years. The long fading of the Neanderthals is a story of endurance, attentiveness, and subtle transformation. It is a story that reminds us that the rhythms of life, the pressures of environment, and the patient work of generations shape outcomes more than any single event. Their disappearance from the landscape was quiet, but their legacy endures. In our DNA, in our understanding of survival, and in the subtle lessons carried through time. Even after Neanderthals disappeared from the landscape, their presence remained embedded in the living world. Their influence endures not only in the artifacts they left behind, but in the very DNA carried by modern humans. Those who live outside sub-Saharan Africa carry traces of Neanderthal heritage, a biological memory, a subtle but enduring connection to a species that walked the earth alongside our ancestors. These echoes remind us that extinction is never absolute, and that life, in its continuity, carries forward traces of those who came before. The tools, shelters, and hearths left behind by Neanderthals testify to their resilience, skill, and ingenuity. In caves, such as Gorham's Cave in Gibraltar, the final chapters of their lives are preserved in stone, soil, and the careful arrangement of space. Within these walls, generations tended fires, crafted tools, and maintained order. Here, at the edge of Europe, Neanderthals confronted the challenges of a changing world with the knowledge accrued over tens of thousands of years. Every carefully shaped tool, every maintained hearth, every pattern of arrangement speaks to lives lived attentively and deliberately, even as the species' presence waned. The story of the Neanderthals is not one of abrupt disappearance, but of integration, memory, and subtle continuity. Interbreeding with Homo sapiens was a quiet, almost invisible force that ensured their legacy would endure. Children of mixed lineage carried the combined strengths, instincts, and knowledge of both species. Over generations, these children became part of the broader Homo sapiens population, inheriting traits of endurance, observation, and adaptability. The boundaries between species were not as rigid as they might have seemed. In blood, in culture, and in memory, the Neanderthals' presence continued to ripple forward through time. Culture, too, carries their imprint. Observations, innovations, and subtle techniques crossed species lines, informing hunting, tool-making, and survival strategies. Fire, carefully tended and maintained, remained central to life. Shelters and camps continued to reflect an understanding of space, order, and environmental awareness. The rhythms of Neanderthal life, attention to season, careful observation of the land, knowledge of flora and fauna, persisted in Homo sapiens' behaviors. Their world shaped ours, leaving traces in practices that endure in ways almost imperceptible, yet profoundly significant. Even the landscape holds their memory. Valleys, rivers, caves, and forests, once traversed and maintained by Neanderthals, bear the silent testimony of generations. Footprints, tools, hearths, and pigment remnants are evidence of a species deeply attuned to its surroundings. These traces do not demand attention, but offer it quietly to those who observe carefully. They remind us that the land has been a shared space, shaped by humans in many forms, and that the patterns of survival, learning, and adaptation are continuous threads woven through deep time. Neanderthals were, in many ways, ordinary humans living extraordinary lives. Their endurance, attentiveness, and skill allowed them to thrive for tens of thousands of years in landscapes that were demanding and unpredictable. They were caregivers, teachers, hunters, and observers, Their lives were full of complexity, continuity, and meaning. Even as their numbers diminished, the depth of their knowledge and the subtlety of their culture left lasting impressions on both the landscape and the humans who succeeded them. In reflecting on the Neanderthals, it is important to recognize the continuity of life rather than its cessation. Their story does not end with absence. It persists in genetic, cultural, and behavioral legacies that ripple across time. Modern humans, shaped in part by interbreeding, carry instincts and adaptations inherited from these distant cousins. Knowledge, survival strategies, and subtle cultural practices survive in echoes across generations. In this sense, the Neanderthals have not vanished. They live on in us, embedded in the ongoing story of humanity. These echoes invite contemplation. What does it mean to share the world with a cousin species? To observe and occasionally integrate knowledge, lineage, and practice? What does it mean to witness the patient persistence of life, and to see that survival is rarely about dominance or conflict, but about observation, adaptation, and subtle continuity? The Neanderthals remind us that life is shaped by careful attention, measured decisions, and an enduring presence that is rarely sudden or dramatic, yet profoundly influential. Even today, in moments of quiet reflection, in the observation of nature, in the practice of tools, or in the subtle rhythms of life, the influence of Neanderthals can be felt. Their DNA, their cultural echoes, and their legacy of survival persist within us. They were human in every sense that matters: attentive, creative, resilient, and capable of reflection. They were a species whose story, though concluding in physical absence, continues in the fabric of human life. The fall of the Neanderthals was neither abrupt nor violent. It was measured, patient, and inevitable, shaped by climate, environmental change, population dynamics, and subtle interaction with Homo sapiens. Their departure from the landscape did not erase their presence. It transformed it into something quieter, subtler, yet enduring. From Gorham's cave to the Ebro River, from toolkits to DNA, the Neanderthals' story continues to be written within the broader narrative of humanity. As we consider their legacy, there is no need for mourning, no need for dramatization. Instead, there is recognition, reflection, and a deep appreciation for their presence in the tapestry of life. They are a reminder that survival, knowledge, and adaptation are ongoing processes, and that even as species fade from the landscape, their influence persists in ways that quietly shape the future. The Neanderthal story ends in disappearance, but begins anew in the continuity of life. In us, in the traces left in landscapes, in tools, and in subtle behaviors, they live on. Their existence reminds us that humanity is not a single line, but a branching, intertwined, and continuous journey. A journey that carries forward the echoes of those who walked before, patiently, attentively, and enduringly human.